What happens when one of country music's biggest stars walks onto a daytime talk show stage thinking he's there for a friendly chat, only to find himself facing off against Hollywood royalty who's clearly done her homework and isn't holding anything back? Blake Shelton thought his appearance on The View was going to be another routine stop on his promotional tour. Just another chance to flash that Oklahoma charm and talk about his latest projects. But what actually unfolded became one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history, and it all started going sideways the moment Jane Fonda opened her mouth. Before we get into exactly what Jane said that left Blake completely speechless, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really went down. Now, let's dive into what happened when Blake Shelton came face to face with Jane Fonda. The whole thing started innocently enough. Blake walked out onto the stage with that signature confident swagger, waving to the audience, flashing his trademark grin. He settled into his seat, clearly comfortable, clearly expecting the usuals. Joy Behar kicked things off with some light banter about his music, and Blake was in his element, cracking jokes, making the audience laugh. Everything was going exactly as planned. But then the conversation shifted, and that's when Jane Fonda, who had been sitting quietly up until that point, leaned forward with this look in her eyes that should have been Blake's first warning sign. Jane started off seemingly casual, asking Blake about his roots, about growing up in Oklahoma, about what shaped his worldview. Blake, thinking he was still in safe territory, launched into his usual spiel about small-town values, about hard work, about the lessons his parents taught him. He was comfortable, maybe too comfortable. That's when Jane cut in. Her voice still calm, but with an edge that made everyone on that stage sit up a little straighter. She said, "Blake, I find it fascinating when people talk about values, because values mean different things to different people, don't they? You've built this brand around being this everyman, this guy who represents rural America. But I'm curious, when you say values, what exactly are we talking about here? Are we talking about the value of equality? The value of making sure everyone has health care? Or are we talking about something else?" The audience got quiet. You could feel the energy in the room shift. Blake's smile faltered for just a second, but he recovered, letting out a little laugh, trying to deflect. He said something about how he's just a singer, how he doesn't get too deep into politics, how he's there to entertain people. Classic deflection move, but Jane wasn't having it. She leaned in closer and said, "See, that's interesting to me, Blake, because you say you don't get into politics, but you're very vocal about certain things. You're very vocal about supporting certain people, about what you believe America should be. So you can't really have it both ways, can you? You can't build a brand on being this voice of the people and then claim you're just a singer when someone asks you to explain what you actually stand for." Blake's face started to change. The easygoing charm was slipping. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, and you could see him trying to figure out how to navigate this. He said, "Look, Jane, I respect that you have your opinions, but I think people are tired of being lectured about what they should think and how they should feel. I make music that makes people happy. That's what I do." And that's when Jane went for the jugular. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. She said, "Blake, I've been in this business longer than you've been alive. I've been lectured, I've been criticized, I've been told to shut up and sing, or in my case, shut up and act more times than I can count. But here's the difference between you and me. When I take a stand on something, I own it. I don't hide behind this facade of being apolitical when it's convenient. You want to be seen as this authentic guy. But authenticity means being willing to stand behind what you believe, even when it's uncomfortable. So I'm asking you again, what do you actually stand for?" The View panel was dead silent. Sarah N. looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Sunny Hostin had this expression that was somewhere between shock and admiration. Joy Behar was watching the whole thing unfold like it was the best television she'd seen in years. And Blake was completely trapped. He tried to laugh it off again, but this time it came out forced. He said, "I stand for a lot of things, Jane. I stand for my family, for my friends, for my fans. I don't think I need to pass some kind of test to prove that I'm authentic." Jane didn't even blink. She said, "Nobody's asking you to pass a test, Blake. I'm just asking you to be honest. You've made comments about Hollywood elites, about people in this industry being out of touch. You've aligned yourself with a certain political perspective, whether you want to admit it or not. And that's fine. You're entitled to your views. But what bothers me is this performance you're putting on right now, acting like you're just this simple guy who doesn't have opinions about anything important. That's not authentic. That's calculated." Blake's jaw tightened. You could see the frustration building. He said, "You know what, Jane? Maybe the difference is that I don't feel the need to broadcast every opinion I have to the entire world." "Maybe I think some things are personal," Jane shot back immediately. "Personal? Blake, you're a public figure. You have millions of followers. You use your platform constantly. You just get to decide when something is personal based on whether the question makes you uncomfortable. That's not how it works." The audience was completely riveted. Some people were nodding along with Jane. Others looked uncomfortable, like they weren't sure if they should be watching this. Blake looked over at Joy Behar like he was hoping she'd step in and change the subject. But Joy just shrugged, clearly enjoying watching Jane take control. Blake took a breath, and you could see him trying to regain his composure. He said, "Look, I came here to talk about my music, to have a good time. I didn't come here to be interrogated about my political beliefs." And Jane, without missing a beat, said, "And I didn't come here to watch someone dodge basic questions about what they stand for. You want to be respected as an artist, as a voice for your fans. But you don't want to be held accountable for anything you actually say or do. That's not how respect works, Blake." That's when Blake made a critical mistake. He let his frustration show. He said, "You know, this is exactly what people are talking about when they say Hollywood is out of touch. You sit up here on your high horse, acting like you have all the answers. Like anyone who doesn't think exactly like you is somehow less than. That's not tolerance, Jane. That's arrogance." The gasp from the audience was audible. You don't call Jane Fonda arrogant on national television. You just don't. But Blake had just done it, and there was no taking it back. Jane's expression didn't change, but her eyes got sharper. She said, "Blake, I've been called worse things by better people. But let's be clear about something. Asking you to stand behind your own words isn't arrogance, it's accountability. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Blake sat there for a moment, and you could see him calculating his next move. He'd just called Jane Fonda arrogant on live television, and the look on her face made it clear she wasn't about to let that slide. The rest of the view panel was practically frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. Blake tried to recover, holding up his hands in a gesture that was meant to look conciliatory, but came across as dismissive. He said, "Look, I didn't mean it like that. I'm just saying that there's a disconnect between what people in places like New York and LA think matters and what people in the rest of the country are dealing with every day. That's all I'm saying." Jane tilted her head, and that smile came back, the one that wasn't really a smile at all. She said, "Blake, I grew up in New York, yes, but I've spent time in every corner of this country. I've been to the places you're talking about. I've listened to people. I've learned from people. So this idea that I'm somehow disconnected from real America because I live in a city, that's a tired argument, and you know it. What you're really saying is that people who disagree with you aren't real Americans. And that's dangerous rhetoric." Blake shook his head, his frustration clearly mounting. He said, "That's not what I'm saying at all. You're twisting my words." Jane didn't let him finish. She said, "I'm not twisting anything, Blake. I'm holding up a mirror. You want to paint yourself as this authentic voice of the people, but the moment someone challenges you, the moment someone asks you to actually articulate what you believe beyond vague platitudes about values in small towns, you deflect, you attack, you try to make it about me instead of about the substance of what we're discussing." Sarah N. finally jumped in, clearly trying to diffuse the situation. She said, "Okay, I think we're all getting a little heated here. Maybe we can take a step back." But Jane wasn't done. She turned to Sarah and said, "No, I don't think we should take a step back. This is important. We have a culture right now where people want all the benefits of having a platform, of being influential, of being listened to, but they don't want any of the responsibility that comes with it. Blake is a perfect example of that. He wants to be seen as this relatable, down-to-earth guy, but he doesn't want to be asked any hard questions about what that actually means." Blake's face was red now. He said, "You don't know anything about me. Jane, you don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I believe. You don't know anything except what you've decided. I am based on where I'm from and what kind of music I make. Jane leaned back in her chair, and for the first time, she looked almost amused. She said, "You're right, Blake. I don't know everything about you, but I know what you've chosen to show the world. I know the comments you've made. I know the people you've supported. I know the image you've cultivated. And when all of that gets questioned, your response is to play the victim. That tells me everything I need to know." The audience was completely split now. You could hear some people clapping, others were silent, some were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Sunny Hostin, who had been quiet through most of this exchange, finally spoke up. She said, "I think what Jane is getting at, Blake, is that authenticity requires consistency. You can't be authentic only when it's convenient." Blake turned to Sunny, and you could see he was grasping for any kind of support. He said, "I am consistent. I've always been consistent about who I am." Sunny gave him a look that was sympathetic but firm. She said, "But have you? Because, from where I'm sitting, it seems like you shift depending on who you're talking to. When you're talking to your fans, you're very clear about certain things. But when you're sitting here, suddenly everything is personal, or off limits, or being twisted. That's not consistency, Blake." Blake looked around the table, and you could see the realization hitting him that he wasn't going to find a lifeline here. Joy Behar, sensing an opportunity, jumped in with a question that made everything worse. She said, "Blake, let me ask you something. Do you think Jane is wrong about anything she said here today?" It was a trap, and Blake knew it. If he said yes, he'd have to explain what she was wrong about, which would mean actually engaging with the substance of what she'd been saying. If he said no, he'd be admitting she was right, which would undermine everything he'd been trying to argue. He sat there for a moment, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find words that wouldn't get him in deeper trouble. He said, "I think Jane has her perspective, and I have mine, and we're not going to agree." Jane laughed. A short, sharp sound. She said, "That's such a cop-out. Blake, of course, we're not going to agree on everything, but that's not what this is about. This is about you being willing to defend your perspective with something more substantial than deflection and victimhood. You want to be taken seriously. Then take yourself seriously enough to articulate what you actually believe." Blake's voice rose slightly, the frustration finally boiling over. He said, "Fine. You want to know what I believe? I believe that people like you have created this environment where if you don't think exactly the right way, if you don't say exactly the right things, you're immediately labeled as some kind of villain. I believe that ordinary people are sick of being talked down to by celebrities who think they have all the answers. I believe that there's value in tradition, in faith, in community, and that those things matter just as much as whatever social cause is trending on." Twitter this week. The audience reacted immediately, a mix of applause and murmurs of disapproval. Jane let the noise settle before responding, and when she did, her voice was calm but cutting. She said, "Blake, nobody is saying tradition and faith and community don't matter. But you're creating a false dichotomy. You're acting like you have to choose between those things and progress, between those things and equality, between those things and compassion for people who might not look like you or live like you. That's the part you're not getting. You can honor where you come from without using it as an excuse to resist growth or change." Blake shot back, "And you can advocate for change without acting like everyone who has questions or concerns. Is some kind of bigot?" Jane's eyes flashed. She said, "I've never called you a bigot, Blake, but I will say this. If your reaction to being asked about equality or justice or accountability is to immediately get defensive and claim you're being attacked, that says more about you than it does about the person asking the question." Sarah N. tried again to redirect. She said, "I think we're all passionate about these issues, and that's good. Passion is good. But maybe we can find some common ground here." Blake let out a bitter laugh. He said, "Common ground. Jane just spent the last 15 minutes telling me everything that's wrong with me." Jane shook her head. She said, "No, Blake. I spent the last 15 minutes asking you to be clear about what you stand for, and you've spent that time dodging, deflecting, and playing the victim. If you feel attacked, maybe it's because you're not comfortable defending your actual positions." Joy Behar, clearly enjoying every second of this, said Blake, "Do you feel like Jane is being unfair to you?" Blake looked at Joy, then at Jane, then out at the audience. He said, "I feel like I walked into an ambush." Jane's response was immediate and sharp. She said, "An ambush." "Blake, These are basic questions. If you can't handle this conversation on a daytime talk show, how do you handle real scrutiny? How do you handle the consequences of the things you say and the positions you take? You want to be a leader, you want to be influential, but you don't want anyone to push back. That's not leadership, that's ego. The word ego hung in the air like a bomb. Blake's expression hardened when Jane said that word. Ego, you could see something shift in him, like he'd finally had enough of trying to play nice. He sat up straighter, his jaw set, and when he spoke, there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. He said, "You want to talk about ego, Jane? Let's talk about ego. You've spent this entire conversation talking down to me, acting like you're the moral authority on everything, like your way of seeing the world is the only legitimate way. And now you're sitting here calling me egotistical because I won't just nod along and agree with everything you say. That's rich." The audience made a collective sound, somewhere between a gasp and a murmur of interest. This was escalating fast, and everyone knew it. Jane's face remained calm, but there was steel in her eyes. She said, "Blake, I've been called worse things by people far more powerful than you. But let's be very clear about something. I didn't talk down to you. I asked you questions. The fact that you interpret being questioned as being talked down to tells me that you're not used to being challenged, and that's a problem." Sunny Hostin interjected, her voice careful but pointed. She said, "Blake, I think what's happening here is that you're experiencing what a lot of people experience when they're used to being in spaces where everyone agrees with them. When you're suddenly in a space where someone has a different perspective and isn't afraid to voice it, it can feel like an attack, even when it's just a conversation." Blake turned to Sunny, his frustration evident. He said, "This isn't a conversation, Sunny. A conversation is two-way. This has been Jane telling me everything I'm doing wrong and everyone else piling on. How is that a conversation?" Joy Behar jumped in with that mischievous glint in her eye. She said, "Well, Blake, you could try actually answering the questions instead of complaining about the questions being asked. That might help." A few people in the audience laughed, but it was nervous laughter. Blake looked at Joy like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said, "I have answered the questions. I've explained where I'm coming from. But nothing I say is good enough because I'm not saying what you all want me to say." Jane leaned forward again, and her voice took on a different quality, less combative, but somehow more devastating. She said, "Blake, here's what I think is really happening here. I think you came on this show expecting everyone to treat you like you get treated everywhere else. You expected us to laugh at your jokes, nod along with your stories, maybe ask you some softball questions about your music and your personal life. You expected to be able to coast on your charm. But the moment you encountered someone who wanted to have a real conversation, who wanted to engage with you on a substantive level, you couldn't handle it. And that's disappointing, because I actually think you're smart enough to do better than this." There was something about the way she said it, almost gentle but absolutely crushing, that made Blake pause. For a moment, he looked like he didn't know what to say. Then he said, his voice quieter but no less tense, "What do you want from me, Jane? What would be good enough for you?" Jane didn't hesitate. She said, "I want you to stop hiding behind this persona. I want you to own your beliefs, whatever they are. If you're conservative, be conservative. If you support certain politicians or policies, say so. But don't play this game where you benefit from the support of people who hold certain views, where you make comments that signal to those people that you're one of them, and then act offended when someone connects those dots and asks you about it. That's cowardice, Blake, and you're better than that." The word cowardice landed like a slap. Blake's face flushed red, and his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. He said, "You don't get to call me a coward. You have no idea what it's like to navigate the world I navigate, to try to make everyone happy, to try to just do my job without getting dragged into culture war nonsense every 5 minutes." Jane's voice rose slightly, matching his energy. She said, "Blake, I've been navigating these waters since before you were born. I've been protested. I've been blacklisted. I've had my career threatened more times than I can count because I stood up for what I believed in. So don't tell me I don't understand. The difference is, I never pretended to be something I wasn't. I never tried to have it both ways. And yes, it cost me sometimes. But at least I can look at myself in the mirror and know that I stood for something real." Sarah Ann made one more attempt to bring the temperature down. She said, "I think both of you are coming from places of real conviction, and that's admirable. Maybe we can acknowledge that we all want what's best. We just have different ideas about how to get there. But Blake wasn't ready to let it go. He said, "You know what the problem is? The problem is that people like Jane think they have a monopoly on caring. Like if you don't express your beliefs the exact way they do, if you don't prioritize the exact same issues they do, then you must not care about anything. That's not fair, and it's not true." Jane shook her head slowly. She said, "Blake, I never said you don't care, but caring isn't enough. Intentions aren't enough. What matters is what you do with your platform, what you do with your influence. And from what I've seen, you use your influence to cultivate this image of being relatable and authentic. But the moment that authenticity is tested, you retreat into vagueness and grievance. That's what I'm challenging. Not whether you care, but whether you're willing to do the hard work of actually standing for something, even when it's uncomfortable." Blake looked exhausted now, like the fight was draining out of him. He said, "I do stand for things. I stand for my family, for the people who support me, for the life I've built. Why isn't that enough?" Jane's expression softened slightly, but her words remained firm. She said, "Because you're not just a private citizen, Blake. You have a voice that reaches millions of people. Whether you like it or not, whether you asked for it or not, that comes with responsibility. And part of that responsibility is being willing to engage honestly about the things that matter. Not just the easy things, not just the things that make you look good, but the hard things too. The things that might cost you something," Sonny added, "and Blake. I think that's what's been so frustrating about this conversation. You keep saying you don't want to be political, but everything is political. The music you make, the way you present yourself, the audiences you cultivate, the people you associate with, all of it sends a message whether you intend it to or not. So when you say you just want to stay out of it, what you're really saying is you want the benefits of your choices without having to defend them." Blake looked around the table, and for the first time, he seemed to really hear what they were saying. His voice was quieter when he spoke again. He said, "So what? I'm just supposed to have an answer for everything. I'm supposed to have a fully formed opinion on every issue." Jane said, "No, Blake, you're supposed to be honest. If you don't know something, say you don't know. If you're still figuring something out, say that. But don't pretend you don't have opinions when you clearly do. Don't hide behind this facade of being apolitical when your actions tell a different story. Just be real with people. That's all anyone is asking." The studio was silent. Blake sat there looking down at his hands, and you could see him processing everything that had just been said. Joy Behar, sensing that this had reached some kind of conclusion, said, "Well, this has certainly been one of the most interesting conversations we've had on this show. Blake, any final thoughts before we have to go to break?" Blake looked up, and his face was a mixture of frustration, exhaustion, and something that might have been respect. He said, "I guess I have a lot to think about. I still don't agree with everything that was said here, but I hear you. I hear what you're saying." Jane nodded, and there was something in her expression that suggested this was the response she'd been hoping for all along. She said, "That's all I wanted, Blake, just for you to really hear it. We don't have to agree, but we do have to be willing to really listen to each other and be honest about where we stand. That's how we move forward." Blake gave a small nod, and the show went to commercial. But the damage was done, or the lesson was learned, depending on how you looked at it. Blake Shelton had walked onto that stage expecting a friendly chat and instead got one of the most intense, revealing conversations of his career. Whether it was humiliation or education or something in between, one thing was certain. He'd never forget his encounter with Jane Fonda on The View. So, what do you think? Did Jane go too far, or did Blake need to hear exactly what she said? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. We want to hear from you. Was this a fair confrontation, or did it cross a line? Let us know.